Yes.
Women Keeping the Books, if you're interested in finding out about the lives of ladies in the past. So without further ado, I will hand over to our lovely speaker. So handing over to Phil Muffett.
Thank you. Well, very nice. Yes. Thank you. I've been terrified and excited all afternoon, and especially this evening coming here. So just tell me a couple of things about myself, just to ease myself into this. So when I left school, I started off as a joiner, and I kind of went through the trade profession, become qualified to make things in timber. And a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today are things that I never got the chance to work on, because it's like really high-end architecture, which I've now worked on in my later life as a profession, as a building inspector for the local authority. So I've done architecture, I've done building control, I look after buildings, and I've worked on this building. I've been on the roof, I've checked the plans, been on the scaffolding, I've been in the foundation, I've been in the voids, I've been in the ceiling above where Queen Victoria slept, on the other wing, and I've seen the roof and everything else and checked it all. And then last year I had the fortune of working on Camellia House, which I think is about £4.5 million. I think this was £13.5 million. And that is a fantastic building that's going to be open next month. And astronomy, though, not all gods. So my normal lecture is usually on things like what's in the sky, like Jupiter and the Pleiades and Orion and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of related to the gods, and it's kind of related to what we're talking about tonight. So while I'm not a historian, I have got a lot of experience in construction, how things are put together, and hopefully I can pull this together to make it entertaining, if not, and hopefully teach you some things about temples and how we've got here today, and this marvelous structure garden, which is quite good, to say the least. So let's hope my technology works. So this is a 17th century painting. Creation. Can't remember the name of the painter, but it's a typical 17th century depiction of the creation of the earth. So about 1600 BC, there was the recorded biggest ever natural that's been recorded, and it was the explosion of the volcano of Santorini, or as it's also called as well. The explosion of this volcano was right my great period, which started about the civilization around the Aegean Sea had been going quite happy, and we got the Mycenaean and Ionian and other groups of Greeks going around the area. And then this volcano exploded. And there's no wonder people believed in gods, because there was no other way to explain natural earthly phenomena and how things happened, such as bad weather, earthquakes, volcanoes, and such forth. So the way the early Greeks explained this, the earth was a female god, most like the sky, and then we've also got, which was the god Kronos, and then we've also got mountains. We've got a lot of things happening here. So the Greeks basically came up with the idea to explain the way the world was. There must have been some initial gods. And what the gods are basically forces of nature. It took me a huge amount of time to get this straight in my mind, my knowledge, because we're probably Christians, the Church Catholic, we think of God as in the Bible, whereas there were many gods And I can understand that now, because there's many forces of nature. And they explained gods have been forces of nature, although they did not understand that at the particular time. So that's a really crucial part of Greek identity and Greek history. So gods, don't think about it as kind of, it's not just mythology, it's actually an explanation for the forces behind what happens to everybody in the world. Okay. So, nah, okay, literally, just a minute. Oh, well, yeah, that's one. Okay. So I'll not go too heavy into this, but you can see there's a lot of gods here, and they've got different tiers. So the first gods are the gods such as time, earth, sky, daylight, and nighttime. So we've got things like Chronos, time, and then these gods have then come together to produce a tier of gods. You need those initial forces of nature to create the next tier down. So these are the Olympian gods. So the Olympian gods came to live. And in fact, well, the main god was Zeus. Now, if we look at this 18th century painting, where's my mouse gone? Well, I didn't. Right, I don't know. If you look at these carefully, just take a while, but you can actually identify some of the gods. So this man across here with the big beard and the parting, we're just here. This is Zeus. Now, one of the reasons why I know this is Zeus is not got his name underneath it, but he's actually got an eagle between his names. Now, Zeus quite often was represented as an eagle, and that's how I know this is him. I also know there's a guy here. This guy would be Poseidon because he's got the three-pronged fork. And then we've also got this guy down here. I think this is Hercules because he's really muscly. And then we've also got this chap here, and that would be Mercury because he's carrying this staff and serpent. And I think that's a bird on the top. And then this is the goddess of wine, because while we might use a glass, in the olden days, I've got a vessel down here. It was a cup. It would have been a wide cup, and this is what would have drunk wine out of in the Greek days. And there's little clues to what people are wearing and how they look, and what they're wearing as to which gods these were. So these were the gods that kind of ruled over the kind of Greek times. So if you would be out in a storm and there was bad weather, that would be Poseidon would have been really angry. Somebody would have upset him and he'd cause a storm. Now then, if you had a safe voyage, you'd do a ceremony and thank and praise Poseidon because you'd had a good voyage, and it spared your life, because apparently the Greeks did a lot of travelling by boat around the Aegean, because it's an island kind of nation, and had been obviously to disasters in storms. Now then, the next tier of gods would have been classed as demigods. Now then, so these aren't true gods. These are actually part mortal. So the mother would have been a regular person, but the father would have been a god like Zeus or Poseidon. Now, how do we come to that conclusion? Hercules is part of the story, and because he was unusually muscly, fit, athletic, and large compared to the average Greek at that particular time, it was different. And so they explain the difference, the fact that, well, he's powerful because his father was Zeus. So it's not a literal thing that his father was Zeus, but this is how it would explain how people would be different. So you might have somebody who was a fast runner. Now his father might have been Hermes, or you might have had somebody who was particularly beautiful. The mother part of the father might have been a Mercury. So there's different gods for different reasons that interact with human life, how the Greeks explained the way things are, the way people are, the way the earth is. So in today's society, in today's teachings, it's remote, and it's took me a lot of time to try and work this out in my head, how the Greeks used to think. But it's consistent through the Bronze Age period because they didn't have the benefit of science as we use today. So that's how we explain it. So my next piece of explaining Greek is because of the explosion of the volcano era, it wiped out lots of parts of Greece under ash, and there's places like Mycenae that they've excavated over the past 100 years, and they've found frescoes and statues and jewellery, and it was lost to time until recently. So all the stuff from the early Bronze Age in Greece has kind of went missing. However, post 1600 BC, stories or history was passed down through stories, and this also happens in Africa. You get African tribes rather than have literature, and they would have stories. The Greeks were pretty much similar. So when they talk about Homer and poetry, it's actually a spoken history that people have learned and passed down and passed down and passed down. So Homer wrote two big books. One called the Iliad. Now the Iliad was written some 100 years after the event of the Battle of Troy. Now a lot of people used to think the Battle of Troy between the Greeks and the northern Persian, Asia, was mythological because it was in a book that was poetry by Homer. Turns out that a lot of things that he talks about all have kernels of truth. And as time goes on, these have been revealed. So they've found Troy, they've found tombs, and they've found statues and tombs that support Homer's story of the Iliad, which was supposed to be about 1250 BC, but it wasn't written until 750 BC. Now, those facts and stories could have been altered, they could have been elaborated on or misunderstood and re-talked about to make it more interesting or more heroic. And then he also wrote about the Odyssey. Now, the Odyssey was about Odysseus. Now, Odysseus was part of the Greek part of the Grecians from the Peloponnese on the west side of Greece. And after he'd fought in Troy with the other warriors, he spent about 10 years traveling all the way around Greece to get back home. He wasn't in a rush to get back to his wife and kids, who had left back in Castle, in Corfu, I think it was. So his story was also written down, and a lot of the bits of kernels of truth in his story have been found as well. So they're kind of poetries and stories put into books a long time after the actual event, but they're written there so that there'd be some consistency, so that it wouldn't get elaborated too much, if you see what I'm saying. But you don't really know how much it's been elaborated on. When we look at Herodotus, now Herodotus was more like a war correspondent, and he was probably born near the beginning of the Persian Wars. There were two main Persian-Greek wars. Now, the Persians were an expanding empire around this time, 450 BC, 500 years BC, and they were so powerful that they extended their reign right up to Western Turkey that it is today, and invaded northern Greece, and was intent on taking over all Greece. And the Greeks did a really good job of fighting them back. Now, Herodotus didn't want the stories to be, he wanted the stories to be kept as a factual part of evidence, as it was. So probably about 25, 50 years after the Persian invasions, he actually wrote that down, and it's called the Herodotus of Histories, which I've read most of when I've been on holiday, and interesting read. And it's it's not just, he actually went round Greece, and he also went round northern Egypt, and he interviewed people, and he wrote their stories down so that he got some kind of factual evidence that he could save. And it's quite a thick book. I've got one down at the front. If I brought quite a few books here, just as evidence, as it were. Then, so that's kind of pretty true as written by the Greeks and Herodotus at that pretty time. So we know that's more realistic than probably Homer's stories are. And then we've got Apollonius. Now, Apollonius was a bit later, and he wrote about the Argonauts, which has been a good film about. I remember it when I was small. I was captivated by it because I was interested in astronomy, and one of the constellations is Perseus in the sky. So it kind of interests me. And Perseus basically travelled across the Aegean Sea and then up through the clashing rocks into the Black Sea and to get the golden fleece to bring back. Now, it turns out that lots of those little bits of the story are actually true today, because the clashing rocks would have been where in northern Turkey, there's a small, I think it's called the isthmus, where there's a small strip of sea that goes between the mountains that goes into the Black Sea, and around that area it's renowned for earthquakes. So you can imagine a couple of thousand years or so BC, they would have explained that Poseidon and the other gods being angry and then shaking the earth about, where you get tsunamis and rocks falling into the sea. And also, something that's brought up more recently is the fact that in that part of Turkey, on the Black Sea, it's a historical fact that in the old and modern ancient times, they used to use fleeces in stream beds or river beds to catch gold dust that had been disturbed, which is where the golden fleece comes from. So when you piece all these little bits of information across Greece together, it kind of gets into the story. Now, it might have been a story to explain where places were around Greece, kind of like a tour around Greece that you would tell your children and pass on that kind of knowledge, so you knew how big or expansive Greece was and where things were. But it's an interesting story to follow. And then we have Ptolemy. Now, Ptolemy's Almagest is actually a piece of work, part Egyptian and part Greek. But the really, really important thing about it is it's not mythological. It's actual factual science. And the Egyptians and the Greeks knew about time, and we actually use the same method of time today as what the Egyptians and the Greeks were using thousands of years BC. We get the seconds from the Egyptians and the minutes and the hours. It was all worked out 2,500, if not further, back in years in time. But we've got factual evidence of this from tombs with paintings on the ceilings and the skies all cut up and split up into segments. And we use exactly the same segments today. And the thing is, the Greeks used part of the Egyptian sky, but they also included their own stuff, like Perseus in the sky. They've got Ursa Major. They've also got Hercules. They've got Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Cepheus. These are all, I won't say mythical, legendary people from history in like antiquity. So what I'm trying to put together is a picture that that some stuff is really, really accurate. And I've got the Almagest with me today. And you could use the Almagest today to work out where the moon is, where the sun is, where the planets move, how they move. And they did all this. And they've also got the constellations, all the classical constellations. And the Greeks were so good that they actually had a piece of mechanical machinery that they could look at the sky, work out angles and coordinates, and plot the positions of sky, of the stars in the sky, to 40 seconds of arc. So if you look at a star in 40 seconds, that's how far it's moved. They could actually pinpoint things down, and they did that because they were interested in the planets. Because the planets and the sun and the moon, if you knew where we were going to be in the future, you could kind of predict where you want to be. Now, I do some open water swimming. Now, I don't believe looking at the sky, I can tell when I'm going to fall in love or have some bad luck, but I can tell by looking at the sky. At the moment, it's too cold to swim in the lake because it's about 7 degrees centigrade, but come August and September, it's going to be about 20 degrees because the sun's higher in the sky. So using astronomy, I can work out time, and I can also work out what things are going to be in the future. So this is where astronomy, astrology, and religion all get smudged together. It's only more recent times we pull that apart, and astronomy, astrology, and religion is separate. But to the Greeks, it was all part of the same thing. So a priest might have been able to not only pray to God, but he'd also be able to work out what was happening, and it also understand things about the sky and how it works. So yeah, it's all interesting stuff. So I think, right, where's all this? So about right at the beginning of the Greek, and well, about halfway through the Greek Empire, this is what Greece kind of looked like. So we've got Athens kind of down here in the middle. We've also got the Peloponnese or Mycenae around here. We've got Corinth and Delphi, and then we've also got places like Ionia, and we've got Corinthia down here. We've got Thera, which is modern-day Santorini, where the major Earth explosion was with the volcano, and then we've got Crete down here with Knossos. That was all buried under ash and volcanic dust. And then we've also got Rhodes over to the right-hand side. And then we've also got, I think, the volcano of Simi. And I think we've also got Kos here, where the big statue of Kos, that was thought to be mythological. But it turns out that some people have got evidence that there's part of the statue left. That was in bronze. One of the things about things like bronze and gold and statues is they either get stolen or they get for their own country, or they use it as weapons. So a lot of bronze material and gold materials disappeared because they've used it as money, but they've also turned it into weapons. I think the Colossus at Kos was captured by Persians, and I'm no doubt in my mind they would have melted it all down and turned them into spears and shields and swords. So there's a lot of stuff that's disappeared that we'll never know about. So this was early Greece. Oh, this is where the clashing rocks are up here, and then this would be in the Black Sea up here. So the Greeks would have known quite extensively this. And then about 500 BC, the Greek Empire kind of expanded. Now, I don't think the Greeks were particularly fierce in the fact that they were an expansionist country like the Persians or the Romans, but they were more trade people because they were trading with Egypt, North Africa, Italy, Asia Minor, and up into the Black Sea. So they were more buzzing about trade than actual like conquering other countries, but they weren't afraid of protecting themselves, which was important. Otherwise, they would have been took over. And again, we've still got Athens down here. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Crete. Now that, oh yeah, we've got Sicily across here, and then we've got the bottom of Italy. Of course, 500 years later on, the Italians decided they were going to take over, and they invaded Greece, and they stole a lot of their stuff and took it back to Italy to form part of the Roman Empire. Now, just in case you're in doubt as to how clever the Greeks were, if I've not already proved it, this is a map by Ptolemy. He didn't only do astronomy, which he wrote the Almagest, he also did geometry, and he also did geography as well. So this is a map, BC, so it's over 2,000 years old, showing most of Europe, well, all of Europe, most of Asia, most of North Africa. So we can see actually how far their expanse had gone. They've gone right up to England, right down the west coast of Africa. They've not got, I don't think they've gone around the south of Africa, and they've gone right across to Thailand and into Central Europe. So they were really, really knowledgeable about the world. And to put that into a map, and you'll notice it's not a flat map, it's a curved map. So you can't draw a flat map you'd have to draw it on a globe to get the full effect. But obviously they've tried to draw a circular Earth onto a flat piece of paper, which is why it's curved the way it is. And they've got the equator, they've got the Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer, but they've also got the ecliptic on here as well, which is this diagonal line going through here. Now, the ecliptic is the path that the sun, so the equator goes out into the sky, so we've got an equator sky, but then we've also got it's a path which is like a sine wave that goes through the sky that the sun follows, being reproduced on the Earth. So what day that the sun crosses the equator on the ecliptic, and this is where he's drawn it. So that takes a lot of knowledge out and put it down on a piece of paper. So they were really, really smart people. And it wasn't until probably the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, it became more technical. Same with astronomy. Up until 50, we were still using method of measuring things, and we're still doing it today. But then what we discover that Jupiter's got moons, and it's like a mini solar system. And then we get people like Kepler and Copernicus now orbits, and they realise that the Earth isn't the centre of the world. The solar system was so. Even Ptolemy said it doesn't matter that the sun or the Earth is at the centre because the sky still looks. I don't know if that was the case or not, but it's been talked about. So really, really smart people. So right, what brings me on to my next piece? Right, that's that part done. So back in the ancient times, when we were talking about people like Terrace and Hercules, they'd have gone on voyages, or they were or they were raising somebody, a sacred site. So a sacred site would have been an area where you would have communed with the gods. So this started off as a simple thing. It would have been something like no skin like into era. Left some your blessings or said your prayers and then go on your voyage. And this is how the basic temples would have started. This is the origin of Greek temple. And when they went, so from that, you could probably be in an area where towns or villages would have grown up in these areas where you might have had these temples. So people invested some time in action for a shrine. The shrine might have. And then thought, well, perhaps we should give them somewhere to live. Instead, we've got wooden columns instead of trees, tree trunk, olive groves. The stuck put trees down, made supports, really simple. Beginnings of a temple. So found this as an old print. I'm not sure exactly, like an old sketch from somebody, and you can see how the development of this one is drawn, how temples are actually 15th century Europe. You can see the back, we've got like a tree with a fork in. The forks are caught in a wall plate. And then on the corner, we've got a straight column or a timber column with a pad on the top to support the beam on top. So the pad on top, it gets flat, which beam across the top. And then you come around the front, we've got simple stone sections that gradually more elaborate. The joiner or a stone mason or a bricklayer, you'll start off doing simple things. More experience, your skills get better, your skills get more advanced, and things get technically better. You've got more knowledge and you can build quite better things with different materials. So we can see here how we've started up with timber, moved into stone, and then we get like ornate and elegant stonework right at the end, which is a Doric column at the end. And you've got a frieze and a roof. So this is like basic history of how temples is to being the elaborate construction and buildings that we have today. So, well, if you're going to build a building of this type, so you've got your basic column, they've got a column cap, that will then carry a beam or a wall plate, and then you've got your ceiling joist that runs across, and then you've got a wall plate on top of that, and then you've got a rafter. And today, we still build like this. So the Greeks have got it all worked out like 2 years ago. So this method, and it all works and it all goes together. Yeah. Well, if you're a bit quiet, it's not say that problem with sound or in it. Must see you out there. It's like to. But German concerns that reasons. So the simplest type would have been a Doric column, sorry. So the shake shaft. So depending on how good the stoneworking is and how good the stonemasons are, depends on how the columns put together, because you can get a single piece of a column, you can get one split in half, or you can get one in sections. So you can see this column, we can build in pieces. So what we would have done is they would have made a template, and then they would have put that over a block of stone, scratched it out on the top of the flat piece of stone, and then cut the sides down. So you've got like a building block, and then he would have reproduced it and reproduced it. So you might have had a stonemason in a quarry, putting out a block, and then the next guy would like scribe it all out, and then the next guy would start chipping it all out. And then by the time you get to the production line, you get somebody cutting all the flutes out, and then you get somebody putting it together. And then you'd have somebody a bit more advanced doing the column cap on top and the abacus, which is a flat bit on top, to carry the beam. So from a stone quarry, you'd end up from a basic lump of stone to something like this that you could then move out to where you're going to build your temple and put these together. And usually they would have a hole in the centre. Now, I've seen some columns with no holes in them, but some columns are turned, some columns are put out by hand on a bench, but then you can either use a hole in the end so that you've got it between two spikes and you can turn it round, or when you erect it, you can put a pole in the middle so that they hold them together so that they all line up together. So, but I think that's probably the reason why they've got a hole in the centre, so it all lines up, so it don't move from side to side. The same as when you look at stonework on this building, they've got holes and then they've got cleats that are iron, and they're a bit like that shape, and they like hold the stone together so the stones can't pull apart. A bit like a mortising tenon. So all these would have had joints where they were all like pushed in together. So the Temple of Hera. So this started off as a timber building, and I think when they did excavations on this is on the west side of Sparta, which is the Peloponnese. They've actually found timber remains underneath some of this, which was from the original building. Now, there's one problem. If you build a timber building, when you get the Persians invading and they steal all your gold and bronze, they also set fire to what else that you believe in or you cherish. And it's usually your houses or your castle or your temple. So a lot of the older temples wouldn't have only got old and probably fallen down, they would have been torched. And there's lots of cases where temples have been torched to the ground. Even stone ones have been set on fire. So the original building for the Temple of Hera, which was Zeus's wife, was burned out and then rebuilt in stone. Now, it wasn't built all at once. What would have happened is they'd have built it in phases. It's a big building project. You needed skilled people to do this. And you obviously had to feed them people and pay them as well. So there might have been locals, there might have been imported tradespeople. I'm not too sure on that. But you can see it's a big building. I think it's about 18 meters across, and I think it's about 60 meters long, if I remember rightly. So that's what it's like on the right at the moment. And this is the artist's impression of what it would like. Quite a tremendous building, and it also looks a bit like the Pantheon as well. So yeah, there's a trend, there's a theme going on. So these are the classical Greek orders. So on the left we've got the Doric, then we've got the Ionic and Corinthian temples. So the original ones were Doric, and you'll learn all this in architecture. The basic designs. Now, when you look around the estate and the building, you can see these. When you approach the front of the building, I don't know if anybody looked at the porch on the front, but they have a Corinthian capital on top of it, and they're really, really big close up. And they're made out of a couple of pieces of stone because they're that big. And the detail in all the campus leaves at the top is really, really good. And there's even holes through where the scratches are, where the leaves come around. Absolutely terrific. Being up on the front of the gable, I think the front of the building is about half an inch curve on the top, just so the water runs off. And on top of the capital, just there as well, it's also kind of just tapered off slightly, so any water can shed off the side as well, so it doesn't stand. The Ionic one is typical with the scroll at the end, so it rolls round and it rolls down that side as well. So that would have been the joint there where you can see that black line. And then we've got a feature called Egg and Dart. Well, that's not Egg and Dart on there, but it's usually Egg and Dart. I think I've seen some Egg and Dart in here. So when you look at these features, this is called Egg and Dart, which is quite typical of what you get around the top of Ionic columns. And then obviously the simplest one, which was the earliest one, are the round one, or the square one. And then you also get small shafts. Now that shaft isn't Greek, that is Roman. It's a Tuscan column, that, whereas that's a Greek column and that's a Greek column, but they're all Greek capitals. So I think sometimes people use a Tuscan one because it's simpler, just to have a straight column rather than cut out all the fluting. Because when you look at some of the fluting, you get straight lines on a piece of stone like that. I don't know how to do it. It's really, really good and technical. So it would have been a master craftsman that would have done a Corinthian column like this. And the Ionic ones are not simple either. In fact, if you look at the bookshelf across here, they've got Ionic capitals on the top of these columns across here. Now, in a straight wall, the actual swirls at the end, or the scrolls at the end, are flat or straight. Now, when you get to a corner of the building, they usually go out at 90 degrees to each other. And if you look at them, they actually stick out. So they would have been a lot harder to make than the flat ones. And there's like formulas to work out the curve and the scrolls and all that kind of stuff. So they've had patterns for this, and that they would have passed on to younger stonemason. So these are my photos. I've not copied these out of the book. So I've been to Rhodes and I've been to specifically Lindos. So Lindos, quite a special place. and they've got their own citadel. So Lindos sticks out on the east coast of Rhodes. It's an ideal location. It's fortified. It looks out over the sea, and it's got a terrific view of the sky as well. And right on top of the citadel, right on the edge of the cliff, they've got a temple to Hera. I think it's Hera, this one, that the Greeks have kind of rebuilt, which is up on top of the hill, right up there. So the reason I put Lindos in, and it's right on the edge of the empire, is that it was a really, really special place. And this was kind of the Oxford University of Greece. There was things going off here that was revolutionary in Greek design. They didn't only just make stone columns. We also think, if you read things like Herodotus, he'd been to Lindos in Rhodes, and they had bronze columns, they had marble columns, they'd also had glass columns as well. So they were using different materials and pushing their science to make these kind of things, because obviously they were embellishing their shrines. And you can see some of the, in the middle photograph, you can see a base out the different types of fluting and Scotia mould and Taurus mould. So you've got a base of a column, but you've also got some beams up there as well. Now, another interesting fact for me is the fact, if you look further down here, the guides don't tell you, down at the bottom, there's these arches. Now, the top, if you go up the steps, there's kind of a lower complex, and then there's the higher complex. So the higher complex is where the priest would have been, and the praying and where you took your offerings. The lower section was where people, general people, would have looked after the place and turned up. Down at the bottom would have been the workshops. So they'd have been woodworkers, stone workers, metal workers, and they'd have some shade, or they could have come out into the open air. I suppose it depends how hot it is. I suppose they would have put the stuff away at night. So these are workshops downstairs underneath there. And in certain parts of Greece, I watched a history program with Bethany Gills on Greece early on this year. And she went to one of the last boatyards on an island in the Aegean Sea. I forgot which island it was. And this woman said, "Oh yeah, my husband stopped working boats. We've got a family history, but the last boat we made was in here." And it was in a building just like that. It was kind of a cliff, and they cut into the cliffside, and it looked exactly like that. But then they built the building out as well, and it was like a miss note, and the fact they were all arched. And inside they've got all the templates for the boats. So what they used to do is used to make templates and these for different parts of the boat, and then would be able to take that to a piece of wood, scribe it out, just like you would on a stone, making a building. And then you'd have somebody cutting all the bits out, and then you'd have somebody making all the bits and putting them all together, and then you'd end up with a shape. So these were absolute masters in bronze work, and they made also clockwork items as well. There's something called the Antikythera. Now, the Antikythera was found in the sea by some sponge divers at the part of the 19th century, and it's believed that they had a ship laden with statues, bronze equipment, and material, and something was clockwork. And they basically took shelter in the bay where Antikythera is, and the boat had sunk. But it turns out some sponge divers ended up in the Aegean Sea in a really bad storm, sheltered in the same bay, something like 2,500 years later. And the following day, when the storm had passed, the divers went down looking for some sponges. And I think they'd spotted a hand sticking out of the rocks in the bottom. And when they'd investigated, they found basically a ship that had sunk 2,500 years ago. Part of the equipment was some bronze dials and gears. Anyway, over about 90 years, and using CCT X-rays, they worked out this was a clockwork version of an orrery. So basically, it was about a shoebox size, and you turned the handle up on the side, and all the planets went round. So you could tell exactly where the sun was and where all the planets were in relation to the sun, and where the stars were, and the moon at any given time in the future or in the past. Now, bear in mind that Ptolemy's book has got such precise readings and recordings of the stars and the planets. I think the Greeks in their bronze work were able to produce a clockwork box so that they could work out when things were going to happen, like eclipses, and what phase the moon would be at. So this would be like an oracle, basically, so it could tell the future, if you see where I'm coming from. Really, really scientific. So it's not a modern thing, clockwork. Right. Is it going again? All right. Sorry. Sorry, keep moving. All right, nice. Yeah. So as time has gone on, we've refined classical Greek and Roman architecture. And you can see on the far right, I've got a Doric column at the top. Then we've got Ionic, and then we've got Corinthian. And then you put these into a building, you can see the bottom bit is called the stereobate and the stylobite. These are the first steps when you approach up into a temple. Then we've got the column. Now, one of the interesting things about a column is, if you draw a straight column, the taller it is, it's straight. If I'm looking at those columns over there, those are straight columns. But if you look at if you look at Kepler's column, it's got a big bulge in it. Now, the bulge isn't by accident. So that is called an entasis. Now, they worked out that the taller the column was, if it was a straight column, it looked hollow in the middle, and it's an optical illusion. So what they worked out is there's a ratio between the height of a column and how fat it is. So you get columns fatter at the bottom. And if you look at this Doric column here, it's quite wide at the bottom, and then you can see it gets to the top and it's thinner. So the illusion is, as things get higher and higher and higher, they actually get like further and further apart. So it's like into a diminishing distance. But the other key is, if it's the fact that columns should have a curve. And if you look at a column, if you look at a row of columns and you kind of get so at an angle, you can see how the columns kind of bend. So it's only when you actually look close up at a column against another column, you can see they've got actual curved surfaces on them. So if you look at this Corinthian column across here, now that's a straight column, and to me that looks as though it's narrower in the middle than it is the top and the bottom. And of course, it's a really, really long column. Yeah, and then you've got this is called the capital. So whatever type of column it is, these are called the capitals. And then we've got the three. This is the architrave, and then we've got the frieze, and then we've got a gable. So you can see these kind of features all over the place. We've got them up here as well. We've also got them around some of the roofs as well. And you can see when we look at these features here, where the cornice is, see where these blocks stand out. It's the same. This is where it comes from. Okay. And then we've got a classical catalogue here that shows you how you should be building your columns and your capitals. So that's a flat scroll, whereas that's on a corner, and you can see how they come out at an angle, same as what that one does up there. So, yeah. So when you start looking at them, they've all got their own little bits of unique individuality. So temple layout. So we start off back in the early days when we first started converting from timber into stone. The layouts of the temples would have been simple, and you might have just had a couple of columns at the front, square building, a couple of fancy columns at the front. So then, as time has gone on and people have developed buildings, they've got more money, they've become wealthier, they've extended and extended. So you tend to find we've got these where you might have 4 columns. The bigger temples, like at Olympia and also in Athens, we get the larger temples where we've got 2 rows of columns at the side and down the side. So this is a really, really expensive temple. And this is probably this is as big as the get. So I think this one would have been Zeus inside this one. I think the original statue of Zeus, it got like ivory skin, and then the clothes would have been in gold. So, and the other thing is, they would have had glass in the eyes. Sometimes you see old statues, and they've got like an eye with a hole in the middle. Well, in antiquity, when they first made them, there would have been probably black ivory and also glass or different coloured materials to represent the different types of eyes. So they've popped out or gone missing or been stolen as time has gone on, but the statue would have been as absolutely as realistic as they could possibly get them. And the more realistic they would have been, the more favourable the gods would have been for their society. So it was imperative that people did a really, really good job. So, yeah, now then, brings me on to my next bit. We have this one, which is a bit unusual. This one's the only round one, and this is called a tholos. So this temple was more to do with the afterlife than the existing life or the life that you want to lead. So, remember when we talked about Homer and Odysseus? Well, it turns out in Catalonia, they've discovered some time since, they've located an area where they believe Odysseus would have lived, and somebody pointed out this, what the Bronze Age tholos. So a tholos would have been a dome structure. So this is basically a pit that's been lined out, and then it's got a dome ceiling, and it would have been covered over. But what's happened is over time, it's been eroded and eroded and eroded. But anyway, they excavated this, and they found a burial inside it. And inside it, they found a button that had got a carving of a dog and a hind on it. And it turns out, in legend, that Odysseus of Catalonia, and he participated in Trojan Wars, which Homer wrote about, and his symbol was actually a hind with a dog. So they believe that this was probably the burial of where they had Odysseus. So perhaps Odysseus wasn't just fiction, or being fact. But that then leads me on to my next temple, which is the Temple of Delphi, rebuilt. It's been flattened, but under this temple, it's round. We've got 10 columns in the middle and then 20 around the outside. Underneath it, there has been in antiquity some caves underneath it and a bit of a labyrinth. Now, they reckon the original building was like 4,000 years BC, which would be right back at the beginning of the Bronze Age. I believe that this area was kind of mythical and related to the gods because it was volcanic place and the gases came out of the ground as well, because it's like a volcanic area. And this became like a shrine, and then for centuries it got bigger and bigger. It got altered. It might have been in timber, and then it's ended up in stone. But it was so famous that people kept building more and more and more temples all over the place. So this is like a mecca for temple building, and it's right in the centre of what the Greeks classed as the centre of the world. And people used to go here especially as a pilgrim, just like they go to Mecca. People would have gone to Delphi because it was the religious place where you would have gone and prayed or gave offerings and tell the future. So this is what the temple, this is what the Temple of Delphi would have looked like. Now, I think Wentworth Castle's got one of these. I've seen it at a distance, and it's got an inner temple which is round, and then I think would have been access into the labyrinth underneath it, and then there's 20 columns around the outside. We've got Ionic capitals, and then we've got a circle building with a tiled roof on this one. And this is the Pythia. She would have been a priestess who was able to tell the future. Now, she's also got, I think that's a wine cup or a goblet, and she's also got an olive branch in her hand. Olive grove, important to the gods. I think that the olive branch was related to Hera. That's it, yeah. And this looks like a king who's paying homage, giving to the priestess so she can tell the future. Now, when we were talking about Rhodes and the oracle and the Antikythera, might have been they had something like that, so they could like predict where the planets and the sun and stars were going to be at any particular time to predict the future. It was also, the sun was painted, and this is a more modern day poet painting on the right hand side. And you can see a crack in the floor and there's gases coming out. These are like volcanic gases, like sulfur or whatever. And it induced her into talking mythologically. So she was kind of overcome, if you like. So anyway, this was like the centre of Greece. And then that brings us on to the Ionic Temple in Wentworth. So the shape is the same as the Delphi one, but it's smaller, but it's not got the inner chamber in the middle. So this is like a reproduction where it's on the outside. So we can see that this has got a base. We've also got a torus mould around the bottom. We've got a two-piece straight column, and then we've also got the Ionic scrolls at the top as well. And then we've got your architrave. We've got like a frieze with no carvings on this. And then we've also got the little, I can't remember what they're called, little bits that stick out like this. And then we've got also an architrave on the top. And then we've got a domed roof on top of this as well. So that is basically, but we've also got the style of it at the bottom, where you've got the 3 steps that work up to the temple. So I think this has been styled on that building, and it's got all the classical parts in it. But the skin on the columns, because there's no fluting. Yeah. So now then, inside. So as you can see, it's domed inside, and you can see that they've also got the Ionic features on the inside as well. And the stones are really quite weathered on the outside. You can see how it would have looked on the inside with clean stonework. And when I first saw this, I didn't realise who the statue was inside. So I'm just going to say a bit about the statue inside. So I didn't realise at first, this is actually Hercules. And the reason it's Hercules is because he's got a skin wrapped around him. I thought it was a bear skin at first, but it turns out it's a lion skin. So when Hercules was young, living in Greece, he was a warrior. He was also part of the Argonauts as well. But partway through the journey, he decided it wasn't for him, and he took a different path. Apparently, he'd killed his wife in an act of anger, and his children. And as repentance, he promised to do good things. So he was given the 12 tasks of Hercules to redeem himself. So the first redemption was basically to help people out. And apparently, in a place called Nemea, which actually exists, and I didn't know this until a couple of weeks ago. I looked it up. I thought it was just a mythical place because as the mythical books with mythical stories of gods. I didn't expect it to be real. But apparently, Nemea is near Corinth on the Peloponnese in Sparta, and it's a real place. And I've looked it up on Google and everything else, and it's a big valley, a lovely part of Greece. And apparently, there was a lion, specifically a nasty lion that was really, really powerful, menacing the local villagers. Well, I was thinking, why have they got lions in Greece? Surely that's mythical. Surely that's not real. But apparently, back in the Bronze Age, there were lions all over Europe. So we've got African lions, we've got East Asian lions, we've got Central Asian lions, we've got European lions. We had lions in Greece called cave lions. So anyway, turns out, I've read another article where archaeologists have actually unearthed skeletons of lions in certain parts of Greece. One of the places where they found at least 3 lions that had been died, buried, and whatever, was in this part of Greece. So it turns out that there's facts behind the fiction. So anyway, Hercules turns up to this village, finds out that these people are suffering with this lion, but they can't kill it. They can't kill it with a sword. They've tried spears and they've tried arrows. And the skin's so tough, they've not been able to puncture the skin. The lion's killing people, it's taking the sheep, it's taking the cows. So Hercules says, well, I'll deal with it. So what he does is he takes a different approach. He finds where the lion's living. He finds a lion's den, which I'm presuming is a cave, because this species of lions are called cave lions. So they are a subspecies of African lions. Apparently, lions in Africa are the main species, and then there's lots of subspecies all over, which is what the Greece ones. So anyway, when the lion goes to its lair, he surprises it, strangles it, and wrestles it and kills it. So he's a big, powerful, muscular guy. He overcomes the lion. He then thinks, I can use this. So what he does is he skins the lion, preserves the skin, and he basically uses it as a cloak, because he becomes the first, what I would say, the first superhero. So just like Superman's got a cape, what Hercules uses is the lion's skin as a cape to protect him. So if anybody tries to spear him or throw shoot an arrow at him or hit him with a sword, it's protecting his back. So that's why Hercules carries a lion skin for protection, because it's the Nemean lion that's particularly vicious, but it's also got a really tough hide. So that's part of the legend as well. So the other thing is, Hercules has got a club. You can't quite see it in this photo, but over the back of his head, he's actually carrying a club. And you can look at it, an obelisk club. Well, actually, this is a club from the olive grove from Hera, where the original grove would have been for the temple when it was wood. So he's took a bough, turned it into a club, and that's basically his weapon. So, and that's what he's doing at the moment. His second challenge was to kill the laden dragon. So I've not looked too deeply into this, but there was there was mythical creature, but it was part dragon, part serpent, terrorizing another local economy. And he went to basically rescue with it, and he beat it to death, basically. And that is what this statue is doing. Hercules is on his second task, and he's killing the laden dragon, and which he does. He also goes on to do several other tasks. Well, as I said, not all killing things. So I think these are in Germany, these statues. So this is a laden dragon. One of the myths is that when they tried to cut the head off, it grew another head. So they ended up with a multi-headed serpent. He got his mate to help him, and basically when they cut one head off, they cauterized it so that it wouldn't grow another head. But anyway, they ended up killing it. The other one, another famous one is Cerberus, which is a multi-headed dog, which he was terrorizing people. He managed to kill that. And of course, the centaur, he must have been in Crete. This is the myth, a legend of the centaur, which was a child of the queen who bore the child of, I can't remember what it was, it might have been the sibling, and it ended up being a deformed mythical creature. So anyway, he killed that as well. And there's actually a place named Heraklion, if I remember rightly, which is in Crete, which is probably named after him. So, nearly finished. Another 5 minutes. Is that all right? Are you all entertained? Right. More up to date. Henry Flintcroft, a man after my own heart, started off to join me in Lancashire, ended up working in London for an architect's company firm, worked on lots of places around London doing surveys, and then ended up doing drawings and architecture. He would have learned classical Greek, just like we would be talking about different capitals and columns and stuff. And he ended up doing surveys of big buildings, Hampton Court, all them kinds of places. You could just do a story on Henry Flint-Cross. Might have been Sir Henry Flint-Cross, actually. And he picked up on some work called the Palladian style. So I thought Palladian came from a palace. The palace, not Pallade, was a Vienna, an architect from Vienna who used symmetry to extend buildings so they'd look better. And this is a basic Palladian building. And when you look at Wentworth Woodhouse, it's got exactly the same features. You've got a central big piece with a gable on the front. You've got side wings, long side wings, and then buildings at the end, called Palladian style. And Bricklow brought it to Wentworth to work on, and you can see exactly the same kind of building. So it's about 1730s. Watson family were developing the house. So we've got the back, well, it would have been the front of the house looking down toward the church. So this is still here today, from right down here. And I think this is the car park right down at the bottom. If we look down here in the back, in the right-hand corner, you see a mound. And I think that is the temple on top of that mound. Not 100% sure, but I think that's what it is. And then there would be a path down into the garden. Something else I noticed, if you look at this build, if you look at the garden, there's 4 needles in the garden. I think those needles at the mausoleum at the other end of the park, if you look at the mausoleum, just like that, there are 4 needles. And I think that's where they are, and that's where they came from. So, and you can see the formal gardens here. So this has all changed. But there's also the terrace that runs down this right-hand side, which comes all the way down here. Okay. So when you look at these buildings here, I don't know if these are still up there. That looks a bit like part of the stable block to me. That looks like a needle. And when you look at these here, some of these features might be in the house or around the ground. Oh, and that was a family, Watson family. I think it was a Peach family when the 2 families came together. So going back to Flitcroft, this is his book, Palladian Architecture. I think he brought it out into the English community. And this is his building. You can see here. Now, if you see here, the column, these needles with the little vases on top, I think there's 4 here. I think they started in the back garden, ended in the front garden, and ended up down at the mausoleum. We've also got Hoover Stand, which Flitcroft designed, and he also did the gatehouse just down there. And if you look, this is really good. It's got proper Doric columns with fluting. There's no base at the bottom. That's an early temple. So when you look back at the early pictures, that is a typical early Greek temple. And then you've got the glyphs on the front, and then you've also got the gable and the bits on the side. So that's really good. That. So we start off with a Doric temple. That's that gatehouse. Then we've got the Ionic Temple with Hercules in, and then we end up with a big house down here, and we've got the big Corinthian columns right up on the front of the house. So in his book, you can see these features all over Wentworth. One particularly that struck me is this here, this gate doorway here, round the side of it, there on the Camellia House. So that is a straight copy from the columns at the side of the Camellia House there. And when you look at these friezes at the top of these gables, these are all down the columns. There's one above that door, and if you look in the other rooms, there's these features all down the rooms, and they're all over the house as well. This here, and this at this end, I think that's where the statues are. You know, is it the statues of the library? They've got a curved ceiling. Same construction, and if you go up into Victoria's bedroom stairs, I've actually been in her ceiling, and this is exactly how they've constructed it. The timber's all been cut in a curve, and it all comes in, and that's just how it's been constructed. And then, when you look down here, this is a survey of Flitcroft's. I don't know which house this is, but when you look at it, this is one of his drawings. And when you look at the plans of Wentworth Woodhouse, this is exactly the kind of features, staircases, wings, windows, all proportional. So, yeah, really interesting. Now then, found this. So this is the main main square, the cube room. Now, when you look at this building, when you look at this one up here, this is a Queen's House in Greenwich, Palladial, designed by Whitlock. When you come across here, that is a dining room in Whitehall. That's in Queen's House, and that's in Whitehall as well. Now, when you look at all these features, balconies, columns, ceilings, beams, all that, all reproduced in the main part of the central building. What you haven't got, though, is you haven't got paintings on the ceilings. Now, I don't know if you couldn't find a painter or if you'd run out of money, but all the features are there apart from the paintings on the ceiling. But what you can see is what's called pattern staining. I know this from being a joiner. You can actually see where the main beams are in the roof, and then you can see the smaller ceilings running through the roof. Where it's dark is where all the dust has leached through the plaster and it leaves the stain. Where it's white is where the beams are, the dust can't get through. So that's what that is. But you can see all the features from down in London is used in the main part of the building. And you can see all these beams that stick out with all the fancy bits on, they're all here. So, and when you look at the floor, there's some similarities between the floors as well. When you start looking around, when you've kind of got your eye into things, you can start seeing where all these things come from. And then almost finished, found this photo, I think this is from the Black Diamonds era. We've got the Ionic Temple here, we've got the, is it the promenade? And then here, it's all excavated to get to the coal. I mean, that's quite frightening. And then I've got a photo here, so we can see the house at the front. We've got the avenue, and then we've got the parade down the side. The temple, that dot there at the end of the arrow, and then it's all excavated. And I think that's the road you can drive on now, and then that's the temple. So it was all excavated around here. The car park must have been excavated. It's in the park down here as well. That is, yeah, that's bring it right up to there. So, and I think that now brings me to the end of my talk. A little bit overdue. I'm sorry. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed that. No worries.
Do I have to talk into this? Oh, it's working. So we have got about 5-10 minutes for questions. I did give you all homework, so you're all meant to think of one. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask Phil? Or have you all failed in your homework?
I don't mind, will it? Yeah, so is that what you're expecting? Has that kind of ticked everybody's boxes? Yeah, there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can.
So I've done my homework.
Oh, maybe it's a lot.
What's your favourite god?
Oh, crikey. Oh, crikey. Yeah. Well, I think Perseus. That was a demigod. I suppose probably as a proper god, probably Uranus. Uranus is the god of the sky. So, I mean, as an astronomer, I think Uranus, god of the sky, probably. But Hercules, to be honest, I mean, I do talks on astronomy, and I always do a little bit of sky law and culture, and I usually talk about Perseus and Andromeda. I'll be honest, I've learned so much about Hercules. I think I'll be doing a lot more about Hercules. I was sort of a bit of a bully, but to be honest, he ended up being a really good man. He ended up as a constellation in the sky.
The last talk I saw you do was about the history of the moon, so it's nice seeing a different side of you. Does anyone else have a question? Of course.
Yeah.
Is it from a local quarry, a local area?
Well, I do think it is local because it's sandstone. In the house, there is marble. There's lots of marble that they had shipped over. In fact, I know it's slightly, I'll come back to that. Some of the marble in the main hall come from Italy. And I think they've been trying to find, I think they found the quarry to get some replacement. Some of them worked out, that they're struggling to get it. But the stone in that building, I think, is local. And just a bit of extra knowledge. I've been looking after the the stable conversion out in the yard, out the back, and they've had to do some excavating to drones. While they've been excavating the yard, they've found some absolute massive bits of stone. I'm talking like a metre by a metre by a metre, which is really unusual. And I think they are lumps of stone that's been excavated locally, and they're the kind of rough bits before they go to the workshop to actually shave them down, because all the lumps of stone are all roughly the same shape, and they're all roughly the same size, and they're all very, very same colour as well. Now, after looking at a lot of excavations, I found it very unusual that would be the case. So I think the spare stone and rubble is buried around the estate. Part of it where the stable block is. So look, that does look like local sandstone. Although the replacement bits are put on, I don't know where they got it from. But it's a very, very similar colour to what they've got. And I've noticed that some of the stone they've left weathered, and it's only the worst bits that they've actually replaced. So there's some historical continuity between good and what's being replaced.
If you want to find out more about the stables work, there is, if you go onto Wentworth Woodhouse's YouTube channel, our amazing digital team are keeping track of what's happening at the stables, so you can watch updates on the videos, including some of the stonemasonry work. Is that what you were going to say?
Around the country, there'll be layers of stone that are the same down here as around in parts of the country, because faults and how things have moved, you'll get the same stone but in different areas. So no, we might have worked it out here, but it will be available somewhere else. The sculpture, well, I couldn't find out who did the sculpture. I'm sure somebody knows, but when you look at the sculptures in the building, they're really high end, and I know they're really, really expensive. When you look close at the Hercules sculpture, it doesn't look high end. It looks to me like an apprentice piece of work. And I think that's why it might be out in the garden.
It's like they put it easily on the fridge.
Yeah, it's just a hunch. Yeah, it might have been an apprentice that might have done a piece of work to try and get qualified to pass out. There's also an interesting statue which is in the garden centre where not the Folly, the maze is. To one side, there's a sandstone statue that's quite badly worn. I think it's King George III. If you look at it, the kind of period clothes he's wearing, but I can't understand why it's stuck where it is, because really it could be a centrepiece somewhere. But it's quite, I suppose it's because it's been weathered, they said, well, we don't just put it to one side. But yeah, there's some bits and stuff around the estate that's really interesting. Same in the garden. Sulking Garden, there's 2 Roman soldiers. They're probably interesting as well, but I don't know the history about them.
Right. Well, I think we'll call it there. So thank you ever so much. I think a big round of applause to Phil.
Thanks, Louise. You've been a real kind audience. Thank you very much.
And if people wanted to come and have a look at your table, have a look at the books. And I look forward to seeing most of them soon.